we're going to talk about generational astrology and how we can even navigate this astrology through the generations. There's been, I think, a really big obsession in the last, like 15 years to obsess over like the generations. And I think that there was a lot of generational information before that, but I do really remember like when I entered the workforce in like 2008, 2009, it was like a big question of like, how do we manage these new adults, right? And it was like a big deal. So, here we are many, many years later, and the internet is just literally exploding with all of these memes. And we're sorting out these things of like, what's the difference between the experience I had and the experience you had? And I think this has a lot to do with the internet and like being able, first of all, to like publicly process that so we can find other people who are similarly minded and having like the similar experiences, even though we didn't know each other. We grew up in different parts of the country or even different parts of the world. And it's like, how is it possible that people who grew up in like totally different places and a totally different culture would have a similar experience and similar feelings? And so that's why I'm going to go over generational astrology. So the internet has created, but it's also created like this place of like understanding like what are we in and what are we dealing with. And what the internet really did in a most dramatic fashion was show up, right? That is like the defining factor of the millennials versus Gen Z versus Gen X and all of that stuff, and like how the baby boomers relate to the internet and how they show up on the internet. Like it's very prominent the way that we talk about how we show up and how we relate to the internet because of how old we were when it came on the scene and how inundated we were, whether we were just kind of at the forefront, right? I think Gen X likes to be like very much like, I'm at the forefront of the technology waves, blah, 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 which is true. Also, millennials like carried the torch, and then Gen Z is like, we've never known any other world, really. And so the fact of this like huge transition on a global scale is what is creating a lot of this turmoil and these questions around generations, right? So like, if you can imagine a world before this, you might imagine a world where we all go, oh, no, this is what my parents did and what their parents did and what their parents did. This is how it all has been coming to light. This is how our lives just have been, right? But when we have the internet, like there's a clear demarcation of this is different than what my parents experienced. This is different than what my grandparents experienced. And I think to a smaller degree, industrialization created a similar effect 100 years ago, 120 years ago now. But right now, what we're dealing with is something on an even more massive scale. And so it begs the question of what is it that makes things different, and how can we kind of relate to that astrologically when we can look at the astrology of the generations. And I'm going to show you some really cool things that are connecting each generation to itself, and then also like these little tails and threads that kind of weave in between to create basically a zeitgeist, right? We're creating, what we're asking when we're talking about generational stuff is like, what is the zeitgeist? What is that like overarching theme for years, for like a decade or more, that is making everyone sort of have a similar experience, even though they're on different parts of the world. And so the very first thing, whenever I look at generational astrology, and I talked about this in my neurodivergence and millennials video, the very first thing I look at is Pluto. Okay. The very first thing. And it is almost perfection the way that Pluto shows up throughout the generations. Okay. I'm going to show you this. Really, really interesting. Oh, yes, I can share my screen. Okay. This one. All right. So this is literally, I just Googled when did Pluto change signs in the last 100 years? Okay. 1922 to 1937. Oh, the other thing that we are obsessed with when it comes to generational awareness is the World War II. World War II and then the internet. So we had industrialization and then World War II and the internet. And all of those things are kind of playing factors of different kinds when it comes to how other generations are like relating to stuff. Okay. So, and in my last video, we only knew about the existence of Pluto since 1935. Okay. So every single sign that Pluto goes through until, I don't know, another 150 years from now, this is going to create brand new awareness of things, right? Because the meaning of Pluto is becoming aware of deep, deep things that we didn't know about and like transformation as a positive personal development thing. Okay. So when we talk about Pluto, we're talking about transformation. When we talk about Pluto from a zeitgeist perspective, we're talking about what are the things that we are focused on transforming in that generation. Okay. And when we look at the generations and we look at Pluto, 1922 to 1937, guess what happened right after 1937? And to be honest, these are like averages that you're looking at here. Pluto kind of dances back and forth in between a sign because he's such a slow mover. When he goes retrograde, he oftentimes goes back into the previous sign and then comes back forward. So 1937 is the very first time Pluto went into Leo, but then it goes back into Cancer and then dances back. So when 1940 is the actual time that he officially went into Leo and shifted into it permanently there. Oh, guess what happened around that time though? World War II, right? That's what happened. And when we're talking about Leo and transformation related to Leo, it is like the entire encompassing is like, who am I? What are my vulnerabilities? And like, how do I become the center of attention? And how do I feel about the center of attention? And how do I transform into somebody who likes it? Or maybe I'm getting the wrong kind of attention, right? And so like early baby boomers who are born in the 40s and until the mid 50s are going to have a lot more sense of like vulnerability, like children should be seen and not heard, right? That's like a big baby boomer thing. That is like that they were told, right? They were told this. So it's just this like awareness of attention. And one of the most insidious things about huge attention, right? Pluto being in Leo at the time of the rise of Nazism and the wars and stuff like that, like historically speaking, that is the crux of Pluto and Leo. And I could go into that for a while, but like that's not what we're talking about today. So then it shifts into Virgo, and this is about the time that we call late baby boomers or like Generation Jones, right? Keeping up with the Joneses. Like the 1950s were the time where everybody was like, I've got this and you've got this, like 2 cars, the American dream, blah, 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 like really all that stuff. But focusing on like, I'm as good as them and I'm going to be focused on being as good as them, right? This Virgo mentality, and like, what's my relationship to being right? What's my relationship to being virtuous? And Virgo is the sign of the Oracle. So what also happened at that time is a lot of baby boomers, and this is what gave rise to the generation of millennials that eventually happened, because late baby boomers are millennials' parents, not necessarily Generation X, right? Like early baby boomers were too young to have kids. I mean, they might have had it if they were like an early baby boomer and then a late whatever Generation Jones, right? Like that late baby boomer. They might have had that, but late baby boomers are millennials' parents, not Generation X. So all that to say, like officially Generation X starts at 1965, 1963. Like it keeps changing, right? Because it's not an exact science. But again, we're looking at, this is late baby boomers and this is early baby boomers and this is Generation X. And that is almost like on the spot, like on the head, perfectly Libra. Generation X is like right there. Anyhow, so late baby boomers gave rise to millennials. Late baby boomers, a lot of them had divinely inspired insights. That's like one of the most Virgo things to do. Virgo is like, I'm going to do everything correctly, but also I'm bringing in, I'm the oracle, right? And so I'm bringing in divine inspiration. And a lot of late baby boomers said, I have had it with this external validation stuff. My kids are going to be different. I know my mom like had a moment of insight with that. And I know a lot of parents at that time, they had a moment of insight where they're like, I'm not going to do this to my kids. Like, whatever this is, it's not happening for me. I'm going to do things differently. And that's when we look at the millennials and all of that. Now, the reason that we have this, okay, boomer stuff and like millennial, boomer, blah, 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 and Gen X is just sitting there going like, guys, like, go away, shut up. The only reason we have that is because it is literally a public argument between parents and kids. That is all that is. When we have okay boomer, it's like, okay, mom, shut up. Literally, that's what this is. Okay. It has nothing to do with any kind of like being out of touch stuff. It's just more of a very public adult parent argument on the main stage. And so it's because you've got this side of people who are like, I'm gonna be different, I'm gonna be myself and do these things. And then the boomers are like, okay, well, that's not how I was raised. And it's like, well, that's how you raised me. And then you have this argument that is just like, okay, we've got this group of people who are like feeling really, really connected to each other about the experiences they're having. And then we have this other group of people who are feeling really connected to this group of experiences that they had. And it's so public and so connected that we've created these meme culture around the millennial boomer thing. And it's literally just parents and kids fighting with each other publicly online in their 40s and 60s. So like, here we are. Anyhow. Then Libra, that's going to be when Pluto moved into Libra, that is like the core around Generation X. And like we do have like 1965 to 1970, there is a lot of activity in other planets. Like Chiron has a lot more to do with early Generation X than Pluto. And that shift, that transition into Generation X, it started with Chiron and then it shifts into this Pluto essential feeling. The classical Generation X like just doesn't care about like what the big deal is, right? It's very angsty, very almost like teen angst. And when we look at Libra is about everybody but yourself, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to put you in front of me. I'm going to put you before me. It's also about beauty. And it's about, Libra is about like completely about relationship, but it's also about fairness. Like I've with this concept of, I don't think it's fair, so I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's fair to general people, so I'm not going to do that. What Generation X did with this, because remember, Pluto is dramatic transformation. So what Generation X did with this is dramatically transform this putting everyone else on a pedestal thing and going, okay, I don't care. I don't care what you have to say about this. I'm going to go be myself and be weird. I'm going to be an angsty teen and it's fine. And transforming that relationship to relationships, right? Generation X, by and large, as is the meme, felt ignored, right? They were the first latchkey generation where, you know, we had the women's revolution in the 1970s and it was like, oh, okay, these kids can like just fend for themselves. It's fine. And here's some microwave dinner. That was kind of the general feeling. So Gen X is just like, yeah, whatever, guys. Cool. I'm going to go do my thing. And I have a lot of autonomy and that's totally fine. And we're transforming this concept of like putting everybody else first, because what happened is their parents went and put themselves first. And when I am going to be me, and they're like, yeah, cool. So this is about that transforming the relationship with other, not putting other people on a pedestal, and keeping in line with like your own uniqueness, which you would think this is more of an Aquarian theme. Libra is also an air sign, right? So now Pluto's in Aquarius today, and in 2025, Pluto's in Aquarius. And I'm curious to see how these kids play out, because it's going to be very different, but probably very similar to Gen X. And also, I have a live card pull right now. So every Tuesday at 11 on Facebook, I pull cards live. Come and join us, and I will see you later.